Ohio State is going on the road to Eugene, Oregon for a Big Ten matchup. Ohio State is favored by, I've seen by 4. I've seen 4.5 yesterday. Now I'm seeing it more like 3.5 at most places. Over under is set at 52.5. Now, I've combed we were just talking about it here on the live show here on First and Long College Football Show. I've combed through just tons of stats and watched all the highlights, and of course, I've watched the games throughout the season, just like all of you fanatics have throughout college football and fans of Ohio State and Oregon. And I'm just looking for edges in this football game. And these are two really, really good football teams. These are two ultra talented football teams. And there's a lot about these two teams that I still feel like we don't exactly know. Now, Oregon, I think, is a little more battle tested at this point in time, right? Looking back at that game against Boise State, I think everybody in the country was expecting Oregon, when you're ranked number 3 in the country or, top 5 or 10 or whatever, when you go play a team like Boise State, it's really a zero sum type situation for you. You either kill them or you're going to hear about it the rest of the year, how you didn't beat them bad enough or you lost to them in the worst case scenario. But Oregon is able to beat Boise, escape undefeated in that situation. And looking back at it, I think Boise is a lot better than what people realized at the time. Um, let's kind of go through this, and we're going to look through some of the Oregon stuff first, and let's kind of get our thoughts together on Oregon, and then we'll do Ohio State the same way, and let's give our predictions. Let's go. Uh, Looking at the stats offensively for Oregon, and in some cases these stats are skewed, and I'll preface everything that I'm going to say with that right there. The stats are only as good and as accurate as the total work that you've put on the football field week in and week out. Ohio State ain't played nobody this year, and we're going to get to them here in a minute. And in some cases, Oregon State has obviously had some easier games as well. So we don't have a full picture painted, but something that I really noticed was a lot of these numbers offensively are not as good as last year. And we had last year's entire year's worth of numbers, the really tough matchups, the easier matchups, all mixed together. And these numbers are still not as good as what we saw last year, with Oregon offensively. Now, maybe that's asking a lot. Bo Nix seemed to be like the premier fit for this offense last year, and it seems like it's taken Dylan Gabriel and Will Stein a little bit of time here to get on the same page. It last week struggled in the red zone, threw a couple of picks, and Dylan Gabriel hasn't made a ton of mistakes this year, but when he has, they've been pretty detrimental. And I'm interested to see how things mesh going forward because it seems to me that they're still trying to kind of figure some things out offensively, and then the lack of run game this year in certain cases has kind of spelled some issues for this offense as well. Really putting a heavy load on Dylan Gabriel. You look at some of his stats throughout some of the games this year. Look at his game log. He's thrown the ball a lot in some of these football games. And I think it was due to the fact that Oregon was trying to catch their footing as far as running the football. Who's going to be that go-to guy? There's not like a ton of options, but I do think Oregon's gotten better as the years went on, and they've shuffled that offensive line around a little bit, and I feel like that situation's better right now than it has been. But still trying to figure out some things on offense. What do you think about the Oregon offense going into this matchup? I didn't even talk about the wide receivers. We're going to kind of get through that here in a second, but just looking at some of these stats, I mean, it does paint a picture, and whereas this offense isn't inefficient or anything like that, it definitely it lacks some pop, right? Not a lot of big play potential going on here, as far at least statistically. Um, but it does still show a functional offense, but I think they're gonna need a pop play or 2 this week if they're gonna win, against the Ohio State Buckeyes. What do you think about the offense so far this year, Mason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the term that gets thrown around for the Oregon offense really this year and even last year is there's a lot of dink and dunk, going on here. I think that that's absolutely accurate. When you look at Will Stein's offense, not a ton of deep shots. They want to protect the football, but get the passing game involved and get the wide receivers and the playmakers involved. You've got Tez Johnson, who I think has been incredible this year once again, one of the best wide receivers in the game. You got Evan Stewart, who we're still kind of holding our breath, hoping that he shows up. He hasn't really been as dynamic of a playmaker as many would have liked. But and then you got Terrence Ferguson, who's been a little bit MIA, I guess you would say. But really, to me, the offensive struggles this season so far have been due to the offensive line being shuffled around a little bit, and in particular, the interior of the offensive line just getting beat way too often. I
Yeah.
think they've got really good tackles, but the interior of the offensive line has struggled. And as we know in football, if the offensive line is struggling, your offense is going to struggle as well. This isn't, but I say that, and let me caveat this: it's not a bad offense. It's not a struggling
Yeah.
offense as a
Right.
whole. I just feel like it's not clicking as much as it should, and a lot of that's due to the protection up front.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, and, I think that the receiver play so far this year has been a little bit underwhelming. Now, look, there's a lot of talk. I'm not the one that came up with this. I just, don't shoot the messenger here, but Gabriel doesn't exactly have the strongest arm. I mean, that's pretty widely known. And getting the ball down the field is one thing. I think his long ball is fine. He has to put a lot of air under it. He's got to throw that thing early. You know what I'm saying? But when you get in the red zone and you don't have that rocket arm like a lot of these guys we're seeing these days, like a Carson Beck, or he has trouble zooming it in those little holes, man. And we saw it this past week, against Michigan State, or the week before, or whatever it was. Um, a couple of interceptions right there in the red zone. And if you think that Ohio State isn't going to be really, really good there in the red zone with the secondary that they've got, you got another thing coming, because they are really, really good. And look, quite frankly, um, this wide receiver group, I talked about them being a little bit underwhelming. They're pretty small too, Mason. They're not like a really big group of guys. This isn't. I don't know. I feel like you're missing that. Like, Georgia's wide receivers haven't just like set the world on fire, but I'll just use them as an example. There's a Colby Young there.
Well,
a
there was
different
a Colby
pitch,
Young there.
huh?
I said, well, there was a Colby Young there, but nonetheless.
Yeah. What do you mean? Did he get hurt?
Oh, I guess you didn't see. He got arrested this morning for a battery of an unborn child or assault of an unborn child. I
Mm,
guess he had a little beef with his baby mama or future baby mama. So,
mm.
anyways, I don't not to steer that away from the Oregon breakdown here, but
Well, there you have it, folks. There's your breaking news, your Georgia Bulldogs news in the middle of our breakdown. I had no idea. I've been glued into this today. And Georgia's not playing a big game this weekend, so I really just wasn't paying attention. But that is quite a shame. But my point is, the, this receiver room, it feels like they're missing like that 6'3", 6'4" type dude. Like these guys are slight built. They got to figure out a way to use their speed and figure out a way to get behind this Ohio State defense. And really, Mason, the only way that I think they're going to be able to do that is going to be by running the football. And they're going to have to be able to figure out a way to bring that defense in. That's their only shot here, because if Ohio State and that secondary that they've got, if they're able to just sit back, I mean, it's going to be, you know, we all know what that's going to be. It's going to be really tough to throw into. Um, And not to mention with Dylan Gabriel's arm strength, I mean, it's going to be tough to get over the top of those guys if they're sitting way back. But uh, Terrence Ferguson is a guy that has been utilized a pretty good bit on this offense. I not the tight ends haven't been utilized as much as what I thought they would this season. This slide right here is actually from our Oregon breakdown that we did early in the season. Obviously I updated some stats and things like that, but we had these three guys on here because we felt like the tight ends would be utilized a good bit more than what they have, and we wanted to kind of showcase what we thought would be, maybe not the strength of the offense, but something that could be used as a strength if game planned correctly. And it just doesn't seem like that's really been the case. I don't know. I don't know what the reason in that is. I don't. No touchdowns for any tight ends so far, and it makes me think about Dylan Gabriel, and I don't know the stats on this, and probably the Oregon fans could probably tell me, but doesn't seem like he likes to go to the middle of the field a whole lot, you know, which is interesting. I don't know exactly how true that is, but I mean, looking at these numbers and comparing them against the numbers for the outside guys, it's apples and oranges. So just something interesting that I noticed while compiling all these stats. We talked about the run game. Jordan James, has been a lot better the last few weeks, but um, Oregon eh, hasn't been great at running the football, and um, that's a little surprising. But really looking back at it with the offensive line that's been shuffled around and things, it makes sense why they've been a little bit better recently than what they are at the beginning of the season. But it's a whole different thing whenever you're about to go against this Ohio State defensive front that is really good, man. And you know, it, I think Ohio State's going to be able to just bring those four guys, and it's going to be really tough for Oregon to block those guys and get anything going in the run game. We'll see. What do you think about what's the path to victory? I guess for this Oregon offense in this football game. I mean, what do they got to do to be able to move the ball successfully and sustain drives? Because if they can't sustain drives, they're going to keep handing that ball back over to the offense of Ohio State, and we're gonna be talking about a runaway victory here.
Yeah, well, I think in college football as a whole, we're seeing a lot of offenses. The RPO was hot for a long time, and it's still being utilized a pretty good bit. But a lot of the best offensive coordinators right now are kind of going back to a traditional offense, and that's why you're seeing a lot lower scores and things like that as well. But you're seeing these offensive coordinators run the ball effectively to set up the pass, or pass to set up the run, and just I think that you're kind of making it a little bit easier on the quarterback by not having this RPO, because that creates a lot of issues, or can create a lot of issues for some quarterbacks. In this game, I think that Oregon's going to have to pass to set up the run. I don't, against this Ohio State defensive front, you're not going to just run up the middle of this defense and expect to set up the pass that way. I think you trust your tackles. You're a little bit hesitant to run in the middle of this offensive line with the issues on the interior. So you have to trust your tackles, and when you do run the football, go to some zone reads and whatnot. And when you're passing the football, if you want to protect the football, which I think Will Stein does a great job of scheming these types of short passes, but throw to the perimeter, throw some wide receiver screens, and run the football that way. And then what you're doing is you're spreading out the Ohio State defense. They've got to react to what the game plan is, right? So you spread them out a little bit and say, look, you're going to have to beat us with 6 or 7 guys in the box. Um, you're not going to be able to load the box, and I don't think that Ohio State necessarily is going to do that anyways. But
Yeah.
you want to spread this Ohio State defense out, and that will open up the run game later on in the game. I think the whole first half I think it's going to be really low scoring in the first half, but I really feel like Oregon's path to success, to answer your question, is going to be to pass the football first, and then rely on the run game later on in the game when the defense gets a little bit gassed.
Defensively, this team has done a lot to improve upon what their flaws were last season. Oregon defensively last year was susceptible to the pass. I mean, the numbers were pretty bad against the pass last season, and Oregon obviously went into the transfer portal and went and got Muhammad, who's made a huge difference there in that secondary. But there's been improvements really across the board: safety, cornerback, nickelback, all that. I mean, they're playing a whole heck of a lot better, and they're going to have to. These numbers are super similar to what they were last year. I mean, it really was crazy. Like I said, this is a slide that I used for um, our preseason breakdown. I just went through and updated all of the statistics, and it really is kind of amazing how consistent Josh Lapoy has been from year to year with the defense here, and made improvements in areas that were outliers. Honestly, the passing defense last year was like 90th in the country to finish the season. So done a whole lot better against the pass so far this season. Now, obviously, we have to take that with a grain of salt, considering who Oregon has played this season. Not exactly, you know, uh, the fun and gun offenses or something. I mean, it's been some pretty easy offenses to defend in some cases. Boise State, I would say, excluded there. Um, Good on third down. Uh, the only thing I'm worried about is this team is a little bit susceptible to pop plays in the run game, just a little bit. 41st in the country of run plays of 20 plus yards, 5 of them for the season so far given up. Um, we know what kind of running back room Ohio State's bringing to Eugene. I mean, it's pretty sick, and I would say that Quinshon Judkins is playing even better than what most people thought he would, right? And we'll get into Ohio State here in a minute. But overall, this defense I think is a little bit better than what it was last season. The middle of this defense is what I suspect will be really tested here. I like a couple of the pieces on the Ohio State offensive line, and last year I felt like one of the big weaknesses for this Oregon defense was the fact that they didn't have like a Jalen Carter or a Jordan Davis or just a Mount Cody or something like that in the middle of this defense. I, s- I still don't think they do. I think they're a little bit better in that situation, but boy, howdy, do I love the edges. I mean, the edge players here are going to have to play a major role in this football game. They're going to have to contain the edge, and they're going to have to get pressure on the quarterback, Will Howard, throughout this football game. Um, they've got some serious responsibilities between Uiagalelei and Birch there, but I think these two guys are up for the test, man. They are legit, and the middle of that defensive line, I worry about them a little bit, but we'll just kind of have to see what Chip Kelly's got up his sleeve here. Um, what do you think about the defense so far this season for the Oregon Ducks as we kind of scan through some of these players here? Um, I love the linebacker room. I talked about there for a second. The secondary, really, I think it's much improved, but they're going to be tested this week. What are your thoughts on the defense so far this year, Mason?
I think it's been pretty good. They really had some issues early on in the season. We saw them struggle against Idaho. We saw them struggle against Boise State, particularly in the run game, which we now know that Boise State relies heavily on the run, which nobody expected they wouldn't. But that's a pretty good team, and I think that Tosh Lupoi probably went into the season thinking that the defense would be a little bit better than it was initially, and really had to figure out his personnel. I like some of the additions that they made. I'm going to go back to your slides here on the back end. Well, they bring in Jabbar Muhammad, they bring in Kobe Savage, they bring in Brandon Johnson. I like all three of those pieces a lot. I really like Brandon Johnson and his ball skills with the when the ball's in the air. This guy's making plays. I've seen him. I think he's had one interception, and I think there's been like three interceptions potentially, or three or four that he got his hand on and just barely missed it. The guy's pretty dang good, and had a lot last year. Had a lot of pass deflections, and I think this was one of the ones when we did our preview. It had like 11 passes defended last season, which is really, really good. Um, and then Jabbar Muhammad, I mean, coming over from Washington, that was one of the best, most underrated transfer portal players in the country last year, and he's looking like the real deal. So I like what they did on the back end. I think that this unit is starting to gel together. Communication is so important on the back end of your defense. Um, but I'm just concerned that as good as these DBs are, they're going up against Ohio State's wide receivers, which is a tall task. These are some of the best in the country, probably the best
Yeah.
overall unit when you look at from redshirt seniors to freshmen. If you look at the entire unit as a whole, nobody's recruited better than Ohio State. So to me, how they match up is probably going to be pretty important for this game. But when you look at Ohio State and what Chip Kelly wants to do, he really wants to run the football. They're running at just, and it's not a huge discrepancy, but at 53% on the season, they're running the football, which is kind of tough to do when you have a stable of receivers like you do. You definitely have to get them involved. But to what success will the defensive line for Oregon have against this Ohio State offensive line, which we said in our Sunday early preview? The offensive line is the weakest part of this Ohio State offense. Um, I stand by that. I feel like that's a pretty clear cut. It's not necessarily a deficiency for the offense, but it is the least impressive unit, I think, for Ohio State. Some people think that they have gotten a lot better on the offensive line. I think that this game will tell me whether or not they actually have. This game is going to test the depth on the offensive line in some way. I do feel with the Oregon defensive line being as good as they've been. How do they play this? That's my biggest question for Oregon's defense. Are they going to keep six in the box and be able to play man on the outside with a little bit of zone on the top end of the defense? Or do they really feel like they're going to have to go 7 or 8 in the box and play strictly man? Depending on the formation for Ohio State. I mean, if they go into 12 personnel, I mean, you got to have 8 men in the box at least. But nonetheless, I want to see on the first couple of drives, what does this defense do? How do they come out? What's their plan to block Ohio State in this offense? In particular, the running backs, because this is a running heavy team. Will Howard can get out. He can run too. It's a big question mark for me, and I don't know if Oregon's going to be able to handle the running game. But at the same time, who has Ohio State faced with a defense like Oregon? Nobody. So this is a game where we have a lot more questions than answers going into it. I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Ohio State has literally played absolutely no one. We can't hardly and so let me preface this again before we move forward. I said with Oregon, we gotta take their stats with a grain of salt. I guess we better take it with 3 grains of salt with Ohio State because they ain't played nobody. I'm talking about nobody. And, we're gonna talk about another matchup here in a few minutes, a big time matchup, the favorite in this matchup that hasn't played anybody either, and maybe it'll surprise some people, the numbers I pop out on that. But anyway, look, we can't take these numbers that I have on the screen here to the right and say that that's what Ohio State's gonna finish with this season. They're a lot better in areas than they were. There was deficiencies last year. Kyle McCord had a hard time, and I don't know if it was, offensive coordinator wise, whatever. You know, coach just for men over there for Ohio State, Ryan Day, he was calling the plays. You know, and he was one of the last head coaches in the game doing that, especially at a big time place. So he goes and he gets a former head coach here to come off of his head coaching job and come call the plays. This is the games that they hired Chip Kelly for right here. I'm very excited to see what he's got cooked up. I know for a fact that they've been holding back all season. I mean, the schedule's set up perfect. They didn't have to pull anything out of their bag that they didn't want to. And so I'm very interested to see what this offense looks like in this football game against a defense that has a pulse. And nobody's even had a pulse at this point. Um, Two teams they've played so far were even in the Power Four. So, like I said, take all these stats with a grain of salt. We know what Chip Kelly's about, though, and we know he's the real deal play caller. We know that, and it seems like he's having fun in this situation. Will Howard, I'm super interested to see how they use this guy. They've been running him a little bit here lately. 24 carries so far this season, 64 yards, nothing overwhelming there, but he's got 4 touchdowns. And you know, I you kinda talked about it just a minute ago, the Oregon defensive line. How are they gonna play with play this offense? Do they bring a couple of extra bodies? Those edge players, are just gonna play such a pivotal role for Oregon in this football game, and whether Will Howard is able to get outside of the tackle box and run around a little bit, I think that kinda is gonna be able to keep Ohio State going early in this football game if he's able to get outside the pocket, move the chains that way. I think there's going to be a necessity for that this week because I think you're right, Mason. I think it's going to be low scoring early on in this football game. Um, this hasn't been like a over the top, like overly explosive football team. We know they've got it in them. We know they've got the players on the outside to do that. But this really, I mean, you look at some of the explosive numbers this year 44th, pass plays 10 plus yards. That's okay, and it's consistent with what we've seen with Will Howard, so I don't expect Ohio State to come out here this week and just start going bombs away. I don't think that's what this offense is. Do they have the receivers that could do that? Probably, yeah, but I don't think that that's the approach that we're gonna see from Ohio State. I think we're gonna see a lot like we've seen this season, lots of run, and gonna see what they can get away with against this Oregon defense. Um, Again, we'll talk about the wide receivers. One of the best wide receiver rooms in the country, guys. I mean, there's really no arguing that. Jeremiah Smith looks like every bit the real deal, considering the fact that he's leading this team receiving, right? Uh, and you've got guys waiting in the wings: Carnell Tate, Ennis. You know, one thing I did notice with Ohio State, you talked about it kind of for a second earlier, Mason, with how do you get all these wide receivers their touches? Well, I'm going to tell you what, they're not getting the guys that aren't starters their touches. They are getting Egbuka touches and they are getting Smith touches, and they are making sure those guys are fed and well fed. So, they're the leading receivers on this team. I believe Tate was the third leading receiver, and then everybody else is single digit receptions. I think, if I remember correctly. They're spreading the ball out between a couple of guys here on this offense and getting their work in. They're lathered up. They're going to be ready for this football game. Both of them are looking really, really outstanding. And then that's all that, not even to mention the running backs. Quinshon Judkin comes over from Ole Miss in the offseason. He's been really good. 60 carries, 468 yards, 7.8 average this season, 5 touchdowns. I really did not think that he would be that guy at Ohio State, to be honest with you. I felt like that last season we saw of him at Ole Miss seemed like something was missing. Maybe he was banged up. I don't know. You don't always know the situation with these guys. Maybe he didn't want to be on that team. I don't know. But so far this season, he's looked really, really good. And then you mentioned the offensive line there. Um, Look, Mason, it's the keys to victory for this Ohio State offense are, I think, a lot more simple than the keys to victory for Oregon's offense. I think you just play within this offense. You've got to be able to run the football, obviously, and I think they're pretty well set up to do that. The going out and getting Seth McLaughlin there from Alabama in the transfer portal at center, I think was a really big deal for this offensive line in the offseason because the offensive line has been a point of contention for this team over the last few seasons. You could argue that if the offensive line plays better against Georgia in that Peach Bowl or whatever it was, there the Midnight Miracle, Ohio State probably wins that football game. You know, um, it's been l- little things like that over the last few years that have kept this team from winning a Big Ten championship and a national championship. I think that this offensive line is a tick better. You obviously return some guys from last season, Simmons, Jackson, Fryer. I think it's reasonable to say that they're 5 to 10% better this season than what they were last year, right? But we haven't seen that. We haven't seen them in these big matchups yet. So, I'm a little I'm holding that thought in reserve a little bit. I think the offensive line is a tick better, and if it is a tick or more better, this Ohio State team could be very, very scary. What do you think about the offense so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, the issue when you're defending this offense is the issue we're going to see Oregon face. I think is that they can beat you in so many different ways. You really have to play light in the box, trust that your guys are going to win, and stop the run, which is a tall task, and then leave the back end kind of spread open a little bit, because you've got two excellent receivers in Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, former 5 star as well, Brandon Ennis, former 5 star as well. They got dudes, right? Um,
Yeah,
so you want to get as much protection on the back end of the defense as you possibly can, and that opens up the running game. Well, the only way that you're going to stop the running game with a light box is if you beat this offensive line, right? Your guys up front for the defensive line just has to they have to beat their guys up front and play gap sound. That's really it really becomes a very tall task for a defense. And I say that to say the Ohio State offense has been incredible. They haven't faced a defense like Oregon. I'm anxious to see what the game plan is. You mentioned, but Chip Kelly hasn't had to hasn't had to dig deep into his bag at all this season. I do
yeah,
think we see some different wrinkles in this game, and and then really Will Howard, how he plays is crucial in this game. I think that we can either put him up on a podium after this game, or we're going to be saying, man, he either cost them this game or almost cost them this game, because I mean he plays quarterback obviously, and that's the most important position in sports. But what what has he shown us in the history of his game that tells us he can beat teams over the top on some deep balls and all that? And maybe Ohio State doesn't need that. Maybe they can run the football against Oregon. But to me, I really feel like Chip Kelly is going to come out and have some design quarterback runs for Will Howard early in the game, kind of get the juices flowing a little bit, get him comfortable. This is the biggest game he's ever played in, and let him settle in just a little bit before they start taking
yeah,
shots. Kind of open up the pass game little by little, and then you start asserting the running game as well. Who's going to be hot? Is it Quinshon Judkins or is it Travion Henderson? You're going to feed one of those guys. Who's going to be the hot hand in this game? Um, but then when it comes down to the offensive line, this is where Ohio State is going to win or lose. I mean, it absolutely is. It's going to be one up front, and with this offensive line, I do still have questions. Can they rise to the occasion? Can they rise to this challenge? Because the front seven for Oregon is that good. They can be a disruptive part of this game, and the reason that Oregon's able to stay in it and possibly win the game.
yeah. Absolutely. Let's talk about this defense. Jim Knowles has done an outstanding job over the last 3 years now. Last year was his second season, so this is his third there at Ohio State. Um, from what he started with 3 seasons ago to what he's got now, he's just done a remarkable job. It was one of the biggest pieces that needed to be fixed on this team's when Ryan Day took over, and here we are, 2024. It sure does look like it's fixed to me. This is one of the best defenses that Ohio State's had in the past several years. You Ohio State fans, let me know in the comment section. I don't remember a defense as good as this one in recent memory. I know there's probably one that I'm overthinking, but um, it's been really, really good and hard to argue with any of the numbers that you're gonna be able to look up on this team. I mean, one of the easiest teams I've researched this season because every time I pull up a list of those 133 teams, which is what I have to do for every stat, every category, blah, 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 they're at the top of every single one of them, man. I don't have to go far. It's Ohio State. I don't have to scroll the page for really anything. Um, so I don't think there's anything to complain about. I really like this defensive line. The more I've went back and watched, the more I've liked it. I'm interested to see, kind of what the depth looks like as the game goes on. I'm not sure how Oregon's offense is, you know, they've been able to sustain drives this season, and I'm assuming that Oregon is able to sustain drives in this football game. I'm interested to see the depth on the defensive line here for Ohio State because we haven't seen those guys play any pivotal minutes this season. Where they have played and got some experience in the blowouts, but it's a whole different thing when you're on the road. You're in an atmosphere like it's going to be in Eugene. It's going to be a wild, wild atmosphere, no doubt. Um, I like the defensive line. Jack Sawyer done a really nice job this season. Ty Hamilton, I really, really like. Some good pieces there. I don't think they're going to have to blitz a whole lot, but if you do, you got tons of dudes that can do it. CJ Hicks, Cody Simon, Sonny Styles, Arvell Reese has been a really nice surprise. Gotten, he's made the most of his playing time that he's gotten in some of these blowouts, and um, linebacker room just looks to be really, really solid, as well as that front four there, front seven of Ohio State. I really, really don't have any questions about, and secondary. There's not much to question there either. This is a big secondary too, man. Like they're pretty large fellas. Like um, they're they're going to be a pretty good bit bigger than these Oregon wide receivers in this football game, and it's a little bit concerning for me. This is a very physical group. Caleb Downs, I don't even think has played his best football this season. Nobody wants to throw the ball over to the side of the field he's on anyway. But you know, you beware. It worries me. Dylan Gabriel's arm strength throwing into the teeth of this defense. It just worries me a little bit. These guys are so damn fast. It's incredible. Um, what are your overall thoughts on the defense? And I guess we'll kind of get into our predictions if you want to do that.
Yeah, so you went through and looked at all the team stats and the national stats, and everything is great for Ohio State. I kind of took a different approach this week and looked at a lot of individual player stats for all of our matchups this week. And what's interesting, so when I look at CFB stats, they only post the top 100 players, right? So I'm hitting Control F, finding Ohio State players who are on the roster or who are on the list of top 100 players in individual statistical categories. You can't find one. It's really interesting when you look at sack totals, tackle totals, pass deflections. You look at tackles for a loss. Uh, they don't show up on any statistical category except for Denzel Burke, who has 2 interceptions, made the list. That tells me that this unit is that this side of the football is very complete. They are playing, and they don't have just 2 or 3 guys that they're relying on. The entire team is getting the job done. And also, it tells me if you're lacking in stats on defense, it means that you're winning a lot of 3 and outs. You're getting off the football. You're not on the field a ton to rack up a ton of tackles and tackles for a loss and sacks and things like that. So they're doing a really good job on first and second down to set up third and long, and really affect the quarterback or affect the offense in that way, which is extremely impressive. I think Oregon has got a very tall task ahead of them on the offensive side of the football, dealing with this defense. It could be the best defense in the country. I don't know of any defense that is this well built personnel wise. Um, And I don't know what advantage you have. I mean, we've spent what 3 or 4 days now trying to find an advantage that Oregon's offense is going to have on this Ohio State defense. I haven't come up with one, Mark. I really dig deep to try to find something. There's not one. You're just going to have to out scheme and out coach Ohio State's defense. That's about the only way, because personnel wise, matchup wise, you're going to have your hands full with this team. I'll go ahead and give you my prediction, and let you give your prediction and close us out. But when I look at this game, Ohio State -4 in this game, traveling to Oregon, so they're on the road, playing in a really tough environment. I mentioned Will Howard is going to be. This is going to be the toughest game he's ever played. This is going to be the most impactful game that he's ever played or
Yep.
been involved in, and I do think that that matters. I feel like early in the game, both teams are just going to be just a bundle of nerves. I mean, I really feel like from a betting perspective, I'm kind of staying away from the over and under and the overall spread for this game, because I do think that playing on the road is tough, especially for a quarterback who's never been in an environment like this. He could be turnover prone and it could cost him the game and things
Yeah.
like that. But I also feel like Ohio State could just come out here and say, "Yeah, no, we're the number one team in the country, and we're about to prove it right now." And they could roll Oregon and beat them by 10 or 14 points or something like that. I don't think it's going to be like a 39-3 win or anything like that, but I think that it could feel like Ohio State is much more dominant than the score maybe necessarily indicates. But I do like, and on Thursday night when we do our betting show, we'll look at some alt lines. We'll look at maybe some first half or first quarter alt lines. I feel like the under in the first half is probably going to be a good play. We'll have to wait and see on that. But for what matters as far as who wins the football game and who loses, I just feel like I know more about this roster, and I've seen more consistency, even though it's been against lesser talent. I've seen more consistency from Ohio State. Um, Man, I know everybody's picking Ohio State, which makes me want to pick Oregon, because I feel like if everybody's on the same train, then that train's headed the wrong direction sometimes. But I just I can't I can't get behind Oregon right now, given what they've shown us so far this season. Even though they've gotten a lot better throughout the year, I think that they're playing their best football right now so far this season. I think that Ohio State has got the right pieces and the right players, the right coaches. I think that that's a tall mountain for Oregon to climb, even at home. Give me Ohio State to win. If I had to bet against the spread, I would pick Ohio State to cover, just because it's a 4 point spread. I don't know if this is a field goal game. I think it could be a 6 or 7 point game. So give me Ohio State to win this one and cover.
I liked something that you said earlier. You were talking about Jim Knowles and the only way that Oregon is going to be able to win this football game is that offense is going to have to out scheme Jim Knowles and that defense. And Jim Knowles in big football games has been known to be ultra aggressive. And I know that Oregon is going to be expecting that. I expect something in loaded up the sleeve for Oregon in this football game. I think Ohio State is going to be trying to blitz. I think Oregon understands that they're not going to be able to run the football up the middle on this team. It's going to be all for naught if you try to. Um, but this game's gonna come down to turnovers. Whoever can get a turnover or 2 in this football game, I think has got the edge here. And Oregon being at home, I think that's a big deal. I don't think Will Howard is particularly clutch. At this point in the season, Ohio State fans, you let me know. I mean, who would you rather have, Will Howard or McCord? And I know everybody's gonna say Will Howard, but I'd love for you to put it in the comment section and let's revisit this next week because, um, McCord's playing amazing this season, and Will Howard, I'm a little bit worried about him in this spot, Mason. And if Oregon can get out early, put a drive together, score, and get a turnover somehow, watch out because I think things could snowball pretty quickly for Ohio State in this football game. Um, I'm taking Oregon plus the points here. I'm going against the grain. I'm not so sure that Oregon wins this football game. I thought about this game a lot today. Whoever wins this game, I think they win at 27-24. I think that's the final score. I just can't quite figure out who wins it in my head. But this is gonna be a closely contested football game, in my opinion, I think. Um, and if you're giving me +4 for Oregon, I will take it. I think the Oregon Ducks make a statement in this football game, and I don't think this is the last time that we're gonna see these 2 teams face off this season.